Now, the next fact we're going to look at is this: Jesus was buried. Why is this fact so important? Listen.
Now, for the believer, for whom the death and resurrection of Jesus are crucially important, as Paul says, of first importance, where do we go next? Jesus died on the cross, as, by the way, even the Talmud tells us, and then we're told he's buried. Now, this is not questioned by a lot of people. I mean, it's a pretty normal event. People who die are buried. But what is there to say in favor of the burial accounts as we learn of them in the New Testament? First of all, although today critics are not so inclined to take the Gospels as they are to take Paul, let's just make the comment that all four Gospels are agreed that the tomb in which Jesus was buried was empty. All right? The critic responds, I don't like the Gospels. But let's point out, number two, just because the critic doesn't like the Gospels, that does not explain the Gospels away. What you need, number two, is evidence that he was buried somewhere else. And that's the key. Evidence that he was buried somewhere else. There are no takers, really. You know why? There's no evidence that he was buried anywhere else. You can say, maybe this, maybe that. But let's ask the unbeliever for the same question, same type of data the Christian has asked for. Where's your data to say that he wasn't buried, just like the Gospel said? Number three, a lot of folks have made the point that Joseph and Nicodemus, their names are difficult to explain in those burial stories unless they were the guys that did the burial. Why bring these names out of obscurity if they weren't really the people? It makes sense of somebody who believes they're telling the right story. Continuing, we have a few early texts. Now, we've mentioned these before, creeds. 1 Corinthians 15, remember the triple hoti, and argument. Paul says, he died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and he was buried, and he was raised, and he appeared. Now follow that sequence in this very early non-Pauline, pre-Pauline text. If somebody is dead, buried, raised, and appeared, the strong implication is the one that went down is the one that came up. You've got Paul saying there was a burial. But he's going to go further than that. We'll save that for a comment on the empty tomb. But the 1 Corinthians 15 passage says buried. And there again, you got that early evidence. Another good argument is Acts 13:29. Why? Because some critical scholars are willing to grant that, as I said earlier, Acts 13 it contains another of those little creedal passages, the abbreviated theology. And there in Acts 13:29, in this passage, we're told that he was buried. So there are two early textual arguments. You've got the Gospels, no evidence against Joseph and Nicodemus. You've got 1 Corinthians 15, Acts 13, and lastly, Jerusalem is the last place you want to proclaim the burial if he's not been buried there, because that's the place, the only place in the world that can be refuted. They can grab the body, they can say, no, he's not here, he's over here. Jerusalem's the last place to make that claim. So there's a half dozen arguments to believe that what the Gospels say about burial and what Paul says at a very early date about burial is indeed true.